The planet Tyran was a desolate wound in the void, a mining world of jagged rock and ash-choked skies, its surface scarred by Promethean rigs and the ceaseless labor of the Emperor's faithful. In its northern reaches, where the hive city of Tyran Primaris clung to the cliffs like a dying beast, the Mordian Iron Guard's 73rd Regiment held a brittle line against an enemy no man could name. Trenches snaked through the basalt plains, their walls slick with condensation and the reek of unburied dead, their floors a mire of ash and blood. The air was heavy with the tang of ozone and fear, a stench that seeped into every guardsman's flak armor like a curse. Corporal Taran Voss crouched in one such trench, his lasgun pressed against his chest, its black steel dulled by months of grit and use. His Mordian uniform, once a pristine blue with polished brass, was now a tattered shroud of dust and stains, the aquila on his shoulder barely discernible. At 28 standard years, Taran was a veteran by Mordian standards, his survival owed to discipline and a stubborn refusal to die. His face was sharp and pale, his eyes shadowed beneath a brow creased by loss, a thin scar tracing his jaw from a shrapnel burst on some forgotten campaign. He was no hero, just a man who kept moving when others fell. The sky above churned with grey clouds, lit by flashes of lightning that cast stark shadows across the trench line. Each rumble shook the earth, loosening pebbles that padded onto Taran's helmet like a grim tattoo. The enemy, unknown, unspoken, had come 3 weeks ago, silencing outposts and colonies with a speed that defied reason. The 73rd had been deployed to hold Tyran Primaris, but their numbers dwindled daily, their vox filled with static and screams. Of the 800 men who had landed, fewer than 300 remained, their faith as frayed as the razor wire beyond the trenches. Taran shifted, his boots sinking into the trench's muddy floor, the movement sending a jolt of pain through his hip, a lingering wound from a collapse during a mine tremor. He peered over the trench's lip, squinting through the haze of ash and mist. Beyond the wire and craters, the horizon was a black smear, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, as if the earth itself breathed. No enemy had shown themselves, but the silence was worse than any bombardment, a quiet that gnawed at the soul. The Vox had gone dead days ago, the astropath's chambers sealed after their screams had echoed through the hive. Emperor's mercy, muttered Private Callan, a lanky youth beside Taran, his hands trembling as he clutched his lay gun. Callan was barely 20, a conscript from Mordia's underhives, his face pale beneath a layer of grime, his eyes wide with a fear that had no name. They're out there, aren't they? I saw something last night. Eyes in the dark, moving too fast. We're done for, Voss. Stow it, Callan, Taran snapped, his voice low and rough, worn thin by shouting over the wind. You'll die faster if you keep looking for ghosts. But the words rang hollow. He'd felt it too. A presence, a weight in the air that made his skin prickle, a chill that no Promethean brazier could banish. The men whispered of Xenos, of creatures that ate worlds, but Taran had seen no proof, only shadows and silence. The trench was a wretched refuge, its floor a shin-deep slurry of ash and ichor, its walls shored with flakboard that groaned under the earth's weight. Lumen strips flickered, casting a sickly glow over the guardsmen who huddled within. Some cleaned their lasguns with ritual precision, murmuring prayers to the Emperor. Others stared into the void, their minds broken by the quiet. The wounded lay propped against the walls, their bandages black with blood, their breaths shallow. The Medici tents had been abandoned after a night raid by unseen claws, leaving the dying to rot. Taran's squad was a shadow of itself. There was Callan, the jittery conscript, Sergeant Lysa, a stern woman whose voice could cut steel, and Trooper Gav, a quiet miner who carved Aquilus into his lasgun stock during downtime. 5 others had died. Wren, torn apart by something in the fog. Mira, lost to a spore that choked her lungs. And 3 more, whose names Taran refused to recall. He tore open a ration pack, the grey paste tasting of ash, and forced it down, knowing strength was all that kept him alive. The Vox crackled, its signal faint and distorted. "All units, stand to," came Captain Torren's voice, clipped and strained. "Movement reported in Sector 4. Prepare for contact." A murmur rippled through the trench, guardsmen hauling themselves up with weary resignation. Taran checked his lasgun's power pack, 3/4 charge, enough for a fight if he aimed true, and slung it over his shoulder. He glanced at Callan, whose hands shook as he fixed his bayonet. The distant crack of Skragrim's whip jolted Gribnibble back to reality. Night was falling, and an absent Snotling would soon be a dead Snotling. With unusual decisiveness, he scooped up the artifact. Finding it surprisingly light, he wrapped it in cloth torn from his garment and tucked it into a hidden pouch. Another innovation that separated him from his fellows. As he scurried back toward the slave pens, Gribnibble failed to notice a silhouette watching from atop a distant scrap heap. The figure was hunched, draped in ragged robes that concealed its form, but the gleam of augmetic eyes tracked the Snotling's movements with inhuman precision. Margos Krell had found the first clue to his quarry. Dawn broke harshly over the scrapyards, the larger red sun casting shadows across the metallic landscape. Gribnibble awoke with unusual clarity, despite the fitful sleep afforded by the crowded Snotling pen. Around him, dozens of his kind stirred reluctantly, their day of toil beginning anew. The artifact, hidden beneath his pallet of rags, had pulsed throughout the night, its energy seeping into him, transforming him in subtle ways. "Move, you stinking runts!" Skragrim's voice cut through the morning air, his whip cracking above the slowest Snotlings. "Big Mech wants double work today. The boss says we's building for war." Gribnibble retrieved the artifact, securing it in his hidden pouch before joining the shuffling line being herded toward the workshop area. Today was different. His eyes caught details previously overlooked. The way tension distributed across structures, the function of gears and pistons in Ork war machines, the flow of energy through crude power systems. It was as though a veil had been lifted from his perception. Wrenchgob's workshop was a sprawling maze of half-finished contraptions, sorted scrap, and roaring furnaces tended by sweating grots. The big mech himself towered over it all, his bulk augmented by mechanical arms and tools that sprouted from his back like metal tentacles. His voice boomed across the yard, demanding parts for his latest creation. A massive vehicle whose purpose seemed to involve transportation and destruction in equal measure. "You, small green thing, bring that shiny bit." Wrenchgob pointed at Gribnibble, who scurried to retrieve a twisted piece of metal that had once been part of an Imperial vehicle's engine block. As he dragged it across the floor, his enhanced mind analyzed its composition, potential uses, improvements that might be made with proper tools. Among the grots and orcs, nobody noticed the human slaves laboring at the workshop's edge, pitiful creatures captured in raids. Yet one moved differently. Beneath the grime and ragged clothing, his movements were too precise, his eyes too alert, his hands too careful with Orky technology. Margos Krell of the Adeptus Mechanicus had spent months infiltrating the Ork settlement, his augmetic implants disguised beneath artificially grown flesh, his mission to recover dangerous archaeotech rumored aboard the crashed Imperial vessel. "Report Gamma 9, Explorator Fleet Solemnes," he encoded in his neural implant. have detected energy patterns consistent with Necron phase crystal technology. Similar artifacts were responsible for tomb world awakenings in the Nephilim sector. Priority retrieval authorized per Reza protocol. The memory of Nephilim 4, where a dormant Necron artifact had suddenly activated, transforming a research team into metallic husks before awakening a slumbering tomb, drove Krell's urgency. The Mechanicus could not allow another such catastrophe. As the day progressed, Gribnibble found himself assigned to cleaning a back corner of the workshop. Here, discarded components and failed experiments were tossed haphazardly. For a Snotling with newfound understanding, it was a treasure trove. When no one looked, Gribnibble pocketed small pieces, a gear, a spring, a wire that still conducted power. Later that afternoon, a smaller Snotling named Snipkit stumbled while carrying scrap, spilling parts across the floor. Scragrim raised his whip, face contorted with rage. Without thinking, Gribnibble moved to help, gathering the fallen pieces with remarkable speed. "Leave him be," Gribnibble said to Scragrim, the words forming before he could consider their danger. He worked faster with help than with beating. The workshop fell silent. No Snotling spoke to Grotz this way. Scragrim's eyes bulged, his whip hand trembling with fury. But before he could strike, Wrenchgob's voice boomed across the shop. "Oi, what's the hold-up? Need them parts now." Scragrim hesitated, then spat at Gribnibble's feet. "Later, runt," he hissed, stomping away. Snipkit stared at Gribnibble with awe. You talked back to a grot." Was efficient, Gribnibble shrugged. But inside, he felt a strange warmth, compassion for another being. The artifact pulsed against his side, and suddenly a wave of irritation swept through him. He snapped, "Just be more careful. Next time I let you get beaten." The harshness of his own words surprised him. This wasn't his thought, was it? The artifact pulsed again, and the moment passed. He helped Snipkit finish collecting the parts, his mind already returning to the designs forming in his head. That night, while most of the settlement slept, Gribnibble crept from the Snotling pen. In the shadow of a discarded boiler, he had discovered a small cavity beneath the scrap piles, just large enough for a Snotling to work in. By the blue light of the artifact, he began sorting his collected treasures, tiny fingers moving with newfound precision. "Disconnect here," he muttered, his vocabulary expanding alongside technical knowledge. "Make power flow better." Pain came without warning, stabbing agony behind his eyes that brought him to his knees. Visions flashed. Tomb-like structures awakening after eons, mechanical scarabs swarming across barren worlds, metal bodies rising from sand. Gribnibble clutched his head, whimpering. When the pain subsided, he found himself sketching symbols in the dust, glyphs he had never seen yet somehow understood. "Using my methods," he whispered, not recognizing that the thoughts weren't entirely his own. "Making myself more." From his hidden vantage point, Krell observed through magnified vision, his fears confirmed. The energy signature matched records of Necron technology, ancient, terrible, anathema to organic life. The fact that it had bonded with a mere Snotling was unexpected, but the danger remained acute. Meanwhile, Scragrim had noticed changes in his Snotling workforce. Tasks completed with unexpected efficiency. Missing tools returned, often modified in ways that improved their function. And one particular run seemed to vanish whenever supervision was lax, only to reappear with a gleam in his yellow eyes that no Snotling should possess. That night, Gribnibble completed his first invention, a simple mechanical claw that multiplied his grip strength tenfold. By the artifact's blue light, he tested it on a piece of scrap metal, bending it with ease. Soon, Gribnibble promised himself, as the artifact's light danced in his increasingly luminous eyes. Soon I'd be tall enough. Weeks passed, and Gribnibble's secret work progressed rapidly. The mechanical claw was just the beginning. In his hidden workshop beneath the scrap piles, he constructed a rudimentary exoskeleton, a harness of salvaged metal and reclaimed hydraulics that wrapped around his tiny frame. The artifact, now secured against his chest, served as both power source and inspiration, its blue light growing stronger as each component was added. The changes in Gribnibble himself became harder to conceal. His eyes now shone with faint blue luminescence in darkness. His movements were too precise, his reactions too quick for a normal Snotling. He required less sleep, his mind racing with designs even as his body worked. Occasionally, headaches would bring him to his knees, accompanied by visions of metal worlds and armies of soulless constructs marching in perfect unison. Proper leverage increases efficiency by a factor of 6, he muttered. While sorting scrap, his vocabulary now far beyond any Snotling's capabilities. Need stronger joint connections for full mobility. Other Snotlings began to notice his strangeness. Most avoided him, their simple instincts sensing something unnatural, but a few, the brightest among them, watched with growing curiosity. Snipkit finally approached Gribnibble during a brief rest period. "You different," Snipkit said simply, his oversized head tilted in curiosity. "You not scared like us. You think things." Gribnibble regarded the other Snotling carefully. Having an ally might speed his work, but it also meant risk of exposure. The artifact pulsed against his chest, almost seeming to encourage the connection. "I'm building something," he admitted finally. "Something to make us strong." That night, Snipkit and 2 other curious Snotlings, Grubwit and Mechnik, followed Gribnibble to his hidden workshop. With multiple pairs of hands, the work accelerated. Gribnibble directed his small crew with growing authority, delegating simpler tasks while he focused on complex mechanisms that would amplify his strength and protect his fragile body. Snipkit proved particularly adept at understanding Gribnibble's increasingly complex instructions. One evening, as they worked on power distribution systems, Snipkit paused. "Why are we doing this?" he asked. "Just to be stronger? Or something else?" Gribnibble looked up from his work, surprised by the question. "For freedom," he replied after consideration. "No more beatings, no more being smallest. We make ourselves matter." Snipkit nodded slowly. "Freedom good, but," he hesitated, "freedom should mean being ourselves, just better, not being something else, right?" The question struck Gribnibble oddly. Before he could respond, the artifact pulsed sharply, sending a spike of pain through his skull. His vision blurred momentarily, and when it cleared, he felt irritation at the interruption. "Get back to work," he snapped. "Questions waste time." From his hidden observation post, Margos Krell watched the proceedings with growing concern. The Necron artifact wasn't merely enhancing the Snotling's intelligence, it was reshaping the creature according to some alien design. More worrying, it was gathering followers. If this continued, the consequences could extend far beyond a simple recovery mission. "The contamination spreads," he encoded in his next message. "The primary carrier is constructing augmetic enhancements using the artifact's power. Multiple secondary subjects now involved. Situation escalating beyond containment parameters." Gribnibble's leadership style grew harsher as work progressed. when Grubwet connected two power conduits incorrectly, causing a minor explosion. Gribnibble's reaction was swift and violent. He struck the other Snotling with his mechanical claw, leaving deep gashes across Grubwet's face. "Stupid, you ruined calibration sequence," he snarled, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that made the other Snotlings cower. "Next time I remove your hands if you make mistake." Snipkit and Mechnik exchanged fearful glances but continued working. Gribnibble had always been different, but this new cruelty was unexpected. Still, the promise of protection from Ork and Grot abuse kept them loyal, if increasingly wary. Meanwhile, Skragrim's suspicions had grown to obsession. Several Snotlings had gone missing from their duties, and tools continued to disappear from the workshop. The Grot Overseer intensified his patrols, adding guards and setting traps for the thieves he was certain operated under his nose. The confrontation came sooner than Gribnibble had planned. While testing the partially completed exoskeleton in pre-dawn hours, he and his followers were spotted by one of Skragrim's patrols. The Grot guards raised the alarm immediately, their shrill voices carrying across the sleeping settlement. "Runt's stealing! Runt's building something!" they shouted. Scrambling to capture the fleeing Snotlings, Gribnibble's exoskeleton wasn't fully operational, but necessity forced his hand. As Mechnik and Snipkit scattered into the shadows, he activated the power systems. The artifact flared with brilliant blue light as it fed energy into the crude machinery. Metal limbs extended, hydraulics hissed, and suddenly Gribnibble stood as tall as a grot, his small body encased in a framework of salvaged metal and alien technology. The Grot guards froze in momentary shock, giving Gribnibble the opening he needed. The exoskeleton moved with surprising grace, lunging forward as mechanical arms seized the nearest guard. With strength no Snotling should possess, Gribnibble hurled the screaming Grot into his companions, sending them tumbling into a scrap pile. "Tell Skragrim," Gribnibble called after them, his voice distorted by the machine's crude vocalizer. "Tell him Gribnibble coming for him soon." The threat delivered. He retreated into the maze of scrap, the exoskeleton's movements becoming increasingly erratic, as power fluctuations caused joints to lock and servos to stutter. By the time he reached his hidden workshop, the system was failing completely. "Need better power distribution," he snarled to Snipkit and Mechnik, who had returned to the hideout. "Need stronger materials. Next design will not fail." The artifact pulsed with renewed intensity, and Gribnibble smiled, a disturbing expression on a Snotling's face. In that moment, neither his followers nor the watching Krell could deny the truth. Something new and dangerous had awakened in the scrapyards of Gorkamorka. The alarm spread through the Ork settlement like wildfire. Tales of a mechanical monster lurking in the scrapyards, of Snotlings with unnatural abilities, of technology that moved with a will of its own. Most Orks dismissed these stories as frightened ramblings of cowardly Grots, but Skragrim knew better. He had seen the broken bodies of his patrol, had heard their descriptions of a Snotling encased in metal, standing tall as a Grot and strong as an Ork. "Find them," he roared at his remaining guards. "Find the runty thieves. I want that clever one alive, the one called Gribnibble. The boss will want to see this." Beneath the scrapyard, Gribnibble and his growing band of followers worked frantically to repair and improve the damaged exoskeleton. The failed test had provided valuable data, highlighting weaknesses in the power distribution system and joint articulation. With the artifact's guidance, Gribnibble sketched new designs, more sophisticated, more efficient, more deadly. "Reinforced skeletal structure here," he instructed Snipkit, who had proven adept at following complex directions. Power conduits must flow through central column, not extremities. The band of rebel Snotlings had grown to nearly a dozen, drawn by whispered promises of liberation from Ork tyranny. Each was assigned tasks according to their limited abilities, forming a primitive assembly line under Gribnibble's increasingly dictatorial leadership. Those who failed to meet his standards suffered his wrath, a harsh blow from his mechanical claw, or worse, exclusion from the enlightenment he selectively bestowed through proximity to the artifact. Margos Krell had managed to establish a temporary Vox relay in a distant corner of the scrapyard, carefully disguised as Orky technology. Through this, he maintained irregular contact with his hidden ship in orbit. The artifact appears to be a Necron phase shifter node, he reported during a rare moment away from his slave duties. Its integration with the Xeno subject continues to accelerate. The subject has constructed a primitive exoskeleton utilizing technology beyond its species' capabilities. Contamination now extends to multiple subjects. Recommend immediate intervention. The response from orbit was delayed but clear. Maintain observation. Combat team preparing for extraction. Estimated arrival 3 standard days. The Emperor protects. 3 days. Krell calculated the probability of containment lasting that long and found the numbers disturbing. The artifact's influence was spreading exponentially, and Gribnibble was proving an unfortunately effective vessel for its power. Krell decided to take matters into his own hands. Under cover of darkness, he made his way to the periphery of Gribnibble's operations, carrying a small disruption device he had constructed from scavenged parts. If he could temporarily disable the artifact's energy field, it might slow its influence until the extraction team arrived. He planted the device near a power conduit that his scans indicated led toward the Snotling's hidden base. The device activated on schedule, causing a momentary fluctuation in the settlement's crude power grid. Inside their workshop, Gribnibble staggered as the artifact pulsed erratically. Systems failed throughout their hideout, plunging them into darkness. For a brief moment, clarity returned to Gribnibble's mind. He saw himself, his actions, with horrible lucidity. What was he becoming? What were these thoughts invading his consciousness? Then the artifact compensated, routing power through secondary systems, and the moment of clarity passed. Gribnibble's eyes narrowed as he traced the disruption to its source. "We have been attacked," he announced to his followers. "Someone attempts to interfere with our work. This cannot be tolerated." The next day, Gribnibble's new exoskeleton was complete. A gleaming amalgamation of salvaged Orky metal, Imperial components, and distinctly alien geometries that seemed to defy proper dimension. At its heart, the artifact pulsed like a living heart, energy flowing through circuitry that shouldn't function yet somehow did. "It is time," Gribnibble declared, his voice carrying resonant harmonics that made his followers shiver. He stepped into the machine, connecting interface points to his small body. The exoskeleton sealed around him, power surging as systems initialized. Metal limbs extended, joints articulated smoothly, and Gribnibble rose to stand nearly as tall as an orc. The artifact's blue glow emanated from gaps in the chest plate, casting eerie shadows across the hidden workshop. "Perfect integration," he said, the exoskeleton's vocalizer transforming his voice into something deeper, almost mechanical. Full mobility achieved. His plan was simple but bold, emerged during peak activity in the scrapyard, when Grots and Orks alike would witness his transformation. The demonstration would draw more followers, while establishing him as a power to be reckoned with. What Gribnibble hadn't accounted for was Skragrim's paranoia. The grot overseer had set additional traps and posted guards throughout the scrapyard. As Gribnibble emerged from the hidden passage, his exoskeleton gleaming in harsh sunlight, an alarm immediately sounded. "It's here! The metal monster!" screamed a grot sentry, frantically blowing on a crude horn. Within moments, Gribnibble found himself surrounded by armed grots, with more converging rapidly. Skragrim pushed through the crowd, his whip coiled in one hand, a crude pistol in the other. "Thought you could hide forever, did ya?" the overseer sneered. "Now we see what's inside this thing." Gribnibble assessed the situation with cold calculation. The exoskeleton's systems were operational, but he was outnumbered and in the open. Combat was suboptimal at this stage. The artifact pulsed against his chest, and new information flowed into his mind. Tactical data, combat protocols, weapon schematics. "Not today," Gribnibble replied, the vocalizer giving his words an unsettling resonance. "Today just warning, tomorrow revolution." Before Skragrim could respond, Gribnibble activated a system he hadn't consciously built into the exoskeleton. The artifact flared, and a pulse of energy erupted outward, temporarily disrupting the crude electrical systems of the grot's weapons and stunning those closest to him. In the resulting confusion, he turned and sprinted away with mechanical speed, weaving through the scrapyard's maze-like pathways. Skragrim's forces pursued, but the exoskeleton's speed and Gribnibble's knowledge of the scrapyard's layout allowed him to evade capture. By nightfall, he'd returned to the hidden workshop through a different entrance, the suit damaged but functional, his resolve hardened by the encounter. "They fear us now," he told his followers, who had watched the confrontation from hiding. "Fear is beginning of control." As Gribnibble stepped out of the damaged exoskeleton, none of his followers commented on the most disturbing development. His eyes now glowed with the same blue light as the artifact, and faint metallic patterns had begun to trace themselves across his green skin like circuit pathways. The days following Gribnibble's public appearance were marked by frantic activity in both camps. Skragrim enforced martial law throughout the Snotling population, instituting harsh punishments for any sign of disobedience or unusual behavior. Several suspected collaborators were executed publicly, their tiny bodies hung from poles as warnings to others who might consider joining the rebellion. Meanwhile, Gribnibble's hidden faction grew despite the danger. Word spread among the more intelligent Snotlings and even some disaffected grots about a leader who could stand against the Orks' brutality. The artifact's influence extended beyond Gribnibble himself now, subtly enhancing the cognitive abilities of those who spent time in his presence, creating a gradient of enlightenment with himself at the center. His latest exoskeleton was a marvel of improvised engineering and alien technology. Standing taller than before, with articulated limbs covered in salvaged armor plates, it transformed the tiny Snotling into an imposing figure. The artifact remained at its heart, now fully integrated into both the machine and Gribnibble himself, its blue glow visible through seams in the armor, like veins of otherworldly energy. "Today we move beyond hiding," Gribnibble announced to his gathered followers, now numbering nearly 30 Snotlings and a handful of curious grots. "Today we show strength where they expect weakness." His plan was audacious. Disguised in his exoskeleton, he would infiltrate a gathering of grots in one of the settlement's crude drinking establishments. There, he would reveal himself not as a Snotling in a machine, but as a new kind of leader, one who could offer protection from Ork brutality and a share in the technology he was developing. Nibbitz, a particularly clever grot who had recently joined their cause after witnessing Gribnibble's power, voiced concerns about their approach. This plan, it good for showing strength, Nibbitz acknowledged. But what after? What kind of life we building here? Freedom should mean choice, not just new masters. Gribnibble turned toward Nibbitz, the artifact pulsing ominously. For a moment, rage flashed across his face. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Grot speaks truth, he admitted. Not enough to overthrow. Must build something better. The moment of clarity was brief, quickly subsumed by the artifact's influence. But it allowed Nibbitz to see that something of the original Gribnibble still existed beneath the growing alien presence. Magos Krell had positioned himself to observe the upcoming gathering, maintaining his cover as a human slave while monitoring the artifact's energy signature. The extraction team was still a day away, according to his latest communication, and the situation was developing too rapidly for comfort. What disturbed him most was the artifact's effect on Gribnibble's physiology. The Snotling's body was incorporating metallic elements in a process disturbingly similar to Necron conversion protocols. The subject's physiological transformation continues, he reported via encrypted transmission. Estimated 20% of organic tissue now replaced with metallic substrate. Cognitive patterns show increasing alignment with Necron command protocols. The artifact appears to be using the Snotling as a vessel for something far more sinister, possibly a Citan shard fragment. At dusk, Gribnibble activated his exoskeleton and made his way through the scrapyard's periphery toward the settlement proper. His movements were confident, the machine responding to his thoughts with fluid precision. Snipkit and Nibbitz accompanied him at a distance, ready to spread word of his arrival to potential recruits. The grot gathering place was a ramshackle structure made from vehicle parts and scavenged metal, lit by guttering fungus lamps that cast sickly green light over the proceedings. Inside, dozens of grots drank fermented squig juice and engaged in their typical pastimes, complaining about orcs, plotting minor sabotages, and boasting of imaginary accomplishments. When Gribnibble entered, the noise died immediately. His exoskeleton had to duck through the entrance, its armored bulk gleaming dully in the fungal light. The grot stared in mixture of fear and fascination, many reaching for crude weapons hidden among their ragged clothing. "I not enemy," Gribnibble announced, the exoskeleton's vocalizer projecting his voice at a volume and timbre designed to command attention. "I offer alternative to orc boot on your neck." A brave or foolish grot stepped forward, squig juice making him bolder than wise. "And who exactly is you to be making offers?" "I am Gribnibble," he replied, the name rolling out with unexpected gravity. "I have technology. I have vision. I offer freedom from constant fear." The artifact pulsed within the exoskeleton's chest, its energy extending outward in invisible waves that subtly influenced the grot's primitive minds, making them more receptive to his words. It was a form of psychic technology that Gribnibble didn't fully understand but instinctively utilized. "Freedom sounds nice," another grot called from the back, "but the orcs smash anything that stands up to them. Why should we listen to some metal thing?" In response, Gribnibble approached a support pillar, a thick piece of metal that helped hold up the structure's roof. With deliberate slowness, he gripped it with the exoskeleton's enhanced hands and twisted. The metal groaned, then gave way, bending like warm wax under his strength. "Because I can protect you," he said simply. "I can make more suits. Make you strong too." The demonstration had its intended effect. Several grots moved closer, curiosity overcoming fear. while Nibbitz circulated among them, whispering of the wonders he had witnessed in Gribnibble's hidden workshop. Yet as he spoke of Gribnibble's power, Nibbitz carefully emphasized the freedom aspect of their uprising, planting seeds of a more egalitarian vision than Gribnibble's increasingly autocratic behavior suggested. Outside, Skragrim had received word of the strange visitor. The Grot overseer arrived with a dozen armed guards, their crude weapons aimed at the establishment's entrance. Through a gap in the wall, Gribnibble observed their approach, calculating odds and evaluating scenarios with cold precision. "We surrounded," he announced to the gathered Grots. "Skragrim comes with guards. Now you choose, stand with me or die with him." The artifact pulsed again, stronger this time, and Gribnibble felt a new capability awaken within the exoskeleton. Weapon systems he hadn't consciously designed, but which had assembled themselves from available components, guided by the artifact's alien intelligence. "Last chance to join," he announced, as panels opened in the exoskeleton's forearms, revealing crude but functional energy projectors, cobbled together from salvaged parts and enhanced by the artifact's power. "After this, you either ally or enemy. No middle ground." Skragrim kicked open the door, his whip uncoiled and pistol raised. "Where's this mechanical monster?" he snarled, then froze as he found himself facing not just Gribnibble's imposing form, but a room full of Grots who had clearly been treating the intruder as a guest rather than a threat. "Traitors," Skragrim spat. "All of you. The boss will hear about this." "The boss will hear nothing from you," Gribnibble replied, raising his arm as the energy projector hummed to life. "Your time ending now." What followed was brief but brutal. Skragrim managed to fire a single shot, which glanced harmlessly off the exoskeleton's armored chest, before Gribnibble's weapon discharged. A beam of blue energy struck the Grot Overseer square in the chest. There was a moment of terrible silence as Skragrim looked down at the smoking hole, where much of his torso had been. Then he collapsed, dead before he hit the floor. His guards stared in shock, their weapons lowering instinctively in the face of technology far beyond anything they had seen before. Gribnibble turned his glowing eyes upon them, the exoskeleton system cycling as weapon capacitors recharged. "Join or die," he stated simply. No third option. The transformation of the abandoned sector began immediately. Under Gribnibble's direction, his growing band of followers, now including dozens of Grots and nearly 100 Snotlings, repurposed the sprawling junkyard into a fortified enclave. Walls rose from salvaged metal. Crude but effective defenses were established at key access points. And at the center, Gribnibble constructed his workshop throne room, where the artifact's glow bathed everything in eerie blue light. The artifact's influence continued to spread, affecting all who spent time in Gribnibble's presence. Snotlings displayed unprecedented organization and problem-solving abilities, while Grots exhibited uncharacteristic loyalty and cooperation. A hierarchy emerged naturally, with the original followers forming an elite inner circle, their intelligence enhanced beyond their species' norm through prolonged exposure to the artifact's energies. Unlike normal Ork technology, which functioned through a combination of crude engineering and the unconscious psychic field generated by Ork belief, the devices in Gribnibble's kingdom operated on principles more aligned with Necron phase technology. Metal components shifted and reconfigured themselves in ways that defied conventional physics, creating a phase field that rendered the settlement nearly invisible to outside detection. Ork patrols would walk right past hidden sections, their primitive minds unable to process the phase-shifted reality before them. Magos Krell maintained his cover among the human slaves, but spent every available moment observing the developing situation. His latest communication with the extraction team had been dire. Unexpected Ork activity in the upper atmosphere had delayed their approach, forcing them to take a more circuitous route to avoid detection. They would not arrive for at least another 3 days. The artifact is creating a self-sustaining power structure, he reported. Analysis suggests it is establishing a beachhead for further expansion. The Snotling vessel is now approximately 35% converted to metallic substrate. Cognitive patterns indicate diminishing original personality, replaced by command protocols of unknown origin. Inside his workshop, Gribnibble labored tirelessly, his body requiring little rest as the artifact's changes progressed. His skin now bore visible metallic traceries, and his eyes glowed permanently with the same blue light as the artifact. He had designed new exoskeletons for his most trusted lieutenants, Snipkit, Mechnik, and several grots, including the observant Nibbitz, though none were as advanced as his own, which had evolved into a formidable battlesuit that completely encased his transforming body. Distribution network requires improvement, he instructed his lieutenants, his voice increasingly mechanical as the exoskeleton's vocalizer merged with his own changing vocal apparatus. Energy capture efficiency currently suboptimal. The artifact had guided him in constructing a primitive reactor at the heart of the settlement, channeling power through conduits that mimicked its own alien geometries. This provided energy for the growing number of technological innovations spreading throughout the Hidden Kingdom: automated defenses, enhanced weapons, communication devices, and even basic medical facilities that accelerated healing through methods that made Krell's mechadendrites twitch with recognition and revulsion. Nibbitz had proven particularly valuable, his natural grot cunning enhanced by the artifact's influence, yet somehow maintaining more independence than most followers. He organized raids on Ork storehouses, gathering needed materials while spreading rumors designed to confuse and misdirect any investigation into the missing supplies. He also recruited selectively from the grot population, identifying those with useful skills or influence who might be turned to their cause. What Gribnibble failed to notice was Nibbitz's growing concern about their leader's behavior. The compassion Gribnibble had initially shown toward his fellow Snotlings had gradually disappeared, replaced by cold calculation and increasingly harsh punishments for failure. Those who spent the most time in his presence exhibited disturbing physical changes: metallic shimmers beneath their skin, eyes that caught the light oddly, movements that became too precise, too mechanical. During a rare moment alone, Nibbitz confided in Mechnik, one of the original Snotlings. "You're not worried about boss? He different now. Not like when we start." Mechnik's eyes, now faintly luminous, darted nervously toward the workshop. "Boss is evolving," he replied, using a word that would have been beyond a normal Snotling's vocabulary. "We all evolving, becoming better." "Better or just different?" Nibbitz pressed. "I seeing things. Grots who spend too much time near artifacts start acting strange, not thinking for themselves no more. We wanted freedom, not new slavery." Mechnik didn't respond directly, but his expression betrayed a flash of the same concern. The artifact's glow had become omnipresent throughout the settlement, its energy flowing through conduits, powering devices, and subtly altering those who lived within its reach. Magos Krell had noticed the same pattern. Through careful observation, he had mapped the spread of the artifact's influence, noting how it created concentric zones of control. Those nearest the center showed the most dramatic changes, while those at the periphery maintained more of their original personalities. It was a classic Necron conversion protocol, but adapted to work slowly, subtly, flying beneath the awareness of its victims until the process was too far advanced to resist. His opportunity to investigate more closely came when a group of human slaves was requisitioned to assist with construction in the Hidden Kingdom. Krell volunteered, using his disguise and apparent physical weakness to appear non-threatening. Once inside the settlement, his augmetic senses gathered data rapidly, confirming his worst fears. The artifact wasn't just creating a rebellion, it was transforming the entire enclave into a living extension of itself. A primitive but effective Necron outpost using whatever materials were available. The Snotlings and Grots were being remade from within, their organic bodies gradually replaced with metallic components that mimicked their original forms, but obeyed only the artifact's will. Most disturbing of all was Gribnibble himself. When the Snotling leader emerged from his workshop to inspect the new construction, Krell's augmetic vision detected that the exoskeleton was no longer a separate entity. It had begun to merge with Gribnibble's body, the distinction between organic tissue and mechanical components blurring as the conversion process accelerated. That night, as the settlement slept, Nibbitz convened a secret meeting of those who shared his concerns. A dozen Grots and a handful of Snotlings gathered in a secluded corner of the enclave, their voices hushed, their eyes darting nervously toward the ever-present blue glow emanating from the central workshop. "Something wrong with Artifact," Nibbitz began. "Not just making us smarter or stronger, changing us into something else, something not Grot, not Snotling, not even Ork. But it giving us power," argued one of the Grots. "We never had power before. Always bottom a pile, always kicked and beaten." "Power with price," Nibbitz countered. "You seen the ones who spend most time with Gribnibble? They're not thinking own thoughts anymore. Just extensions of him, or whatever controlling him. Freedom should mean keeping yourself, not becoming machine." The debate continued in whispers, with opinion divided between those who welcomed the changes as evolution and those who feared they were losing themselves to something alien. What none of them noticed was the human slave listening from the shadows, his augmetic senses recording every word. Krell recognized an opportunity. These dissidents could provide a crucial diversion when the extraction team arrived. He would need to make contact carefully, to guide their resistance without revealing his true nature. As he slipped away to prepare his next transmission, he noticed something disturbing. A faint metallic sheen had appeared on his artificial flesh, where it had been exposed to the artifact's energy field. The contamination was spreading faster than anticipated. The disappearance of Skragrim and dozens of Grots did not go unnoticed in the broader Ork settlement. Reports of a mechanical entity, of weapons that fired blue energy, and of entire sections of the scrapyard becoming inaccessible eventually reached Big Mech Wrenchgob. The Ork engineer had initially dismissed these stories as typical Grot cowardice, but the pattern of missing supplies and equipment had become too significant to ignore. "Something's going on in the scrap fields," Wrenchgob declared to the settlement's war boss, a massive Ork named Grimtooth. "Lots of gubbins gone missing. Good bits too, not just junk." "Probably just them thieving Grots," Grimtooth replied dismissively, more concerned with plans for his next raid. "Smash a few, the rest will behave." "This different," Wrenchgob insisted. "Grots don't know how to use half the stuff that's missing, and there's talk of blue lights and metal monsters. Might be Yumi tech, might be worse." Grimtooth's interest finally peaked at the mention of potential technology to loot. "Fine, Take some boys and check it out, but don't waste too much time. We got a proper whack to prepare for." Authorized to investigate, Wrenchgob assembled a force of Ork boys and his most trusted mech-boy assistants. Armed with an assortment of crude but powerful weapons, they began a systematic search of the scrapyard's outer regions, working their way toward the areas where the disturbances had been reported. Within the Hidden Kingdom, Gribnibble's network of scouts quickly detected the approaching Ork party. The settlement mobilized with machine-like efficiency. Defensive positions were manned, and Gribnibble himself donned his latest iteration of the exoskeleton, a fearsome construction that now stood as tall as an orc, bristling with weaponry and pulsing with the artifact's power. "Prepare for contact," he instructed his lieutenants, his voice devoid of emotion. "Capture primary target Wrenchgob if possible. His knowledge would be valuable addition to the collective." Nibbitz, who had maintained his position in Gribnibble's inner circle while secretly organizing resistance, saw an opportunity in the coming conflict. If the Orks breached the settlement's defenses, the resulting chaos might provide cover for his faction to escape the artifact's influence. He had made contact with several other dissidents, including a strangely knowledgeable human slave who had approached him with warnings about the artifact's true nature. "This artifact is not empowering you," the human had whispered during a clandestine meeting. "It is consuming you, replacing you with extensions of itself. What you see happening to Gribnibble will eventually happen to all who remain in its presence." Nibbitz had been skeptical at first, but Krell had shown him evidence. Tissue samples from followers who had been exposed to the artifact for varying lengths of time, each showing progressive replacement of organic matter with metallic structures that mimicked living cells but were fundamentally alien. "How can we stop it?" Nibbitz had asked. "My associates will arrive soon," Krell replied carefully. "They possess technology designed to contain such artifacts. But we will need a diversion and a way to get close to Gribnibble." Now, as the settlement prepared for its first major battle, Nibbitz used the commotion to gather his fellow dissidents. "When fighting starts," he instructed them, "we move toward eastern perimeter. Human Krell says he can help us escape if we reach the old storage bunkers." Krell had finally received confirmation that the extraction team had made planetfall and was moving toward his coordinates. The delay had allowed the artifact's influence to spread further than anticipated, and the tech priest calculated that direct confrontation was now inevitable. The plan had shifted from covert retrieval to a combat operation, with a secondary objective of evacuating uncontaminated survivors. Wrenchgob's forces approached the Hidden Kingdom with typical Orky subtlety, which is to say, none at all. Shots were fired at shadows, scrap piles were overturned, and loud challenges were issued to whoever or whatever might be hiding. The settlement's defenders held their positions, disciplined beyond what any Snotling or Grot should be capable of. Gribnibble had deployed them in overlapping fields of fire, with the strongest weapons concentrated at likely points of assault. When the Orks finally blundered into range, the response was coordinated and devastating. Blue energy beams lanced from concealed positions, striking with precision that left the Orks momentarily stunned. Their thick hides protected them from immediate death, but several boys went down with smoking wounds where the energy had burned through their crude armor. Wrenchgob himself ducked behind a wrecked truck, his mechanical arm whirring as he brought his own custom weapon to bear, a massive cannon that fired explosive projectiles salvaged from Imperial artillery shells. "That's no Grot technology," he shouted as another burst of blue energy narrowly missed him. "That's something else, something Interesting, the Ork's curiosity was as dangerous as his aggression. Where another might have retreated in the face of superior firepower, Wrenchgob was enthralled by the technical challenge presented. He began analyzing the energy signatures, his surprisingly sophisticated understanding of weaponry allowing him to identify vulnerabilities in the defenders' positions. "Hit the blue glowy bits," he instructed his forces. "Them's the power sources. Shoot them and the beams stop." The battle escalated quickly. The Orks, directed by Wrenchgob's unexpected tactical acumen, began targeting the energy conduits that Gribnibble had installed throughout the settlement's defenses. As connections were severed, sections of the defensive network faltered, allowing the Orks to advance despite taking casualties. In his command center, Gribnibble monitored the situation with inhuman calm. The artifact pulsed urgently, feeding him strategies and contingencies. He deployed reserves to shore up weakened sections, rerouted power through secondary conduits, and prepared his own weapons for direct intervention if necessary. Mechboy Wrenchgob demonstrates unexpected analytical capabilities, he observed to Snipkit, who stood beside his throne, now more machine than Snotling. Capture priority increased. His cognitive patterns would enhance the collective significantly. Nibbitz, observing from his position near the eastern perimeter, saw his opportunity as the battle drew more defenders toward the main engagement. He gathered his fellow dissidents, a mixed group of Grots and Snotlings, who had maintained enough of their original personalities to fear what they were becoming, and began moving toward the designated extraction point. They had nearly reached the perimeter when disaster struck. One of the group, a Snotling, whose eyes had already begun to glow with the artifact's light, suddenly seized up. His body contorted, mouth opening in a silent scream as metallic filaments erupted from beneath his skin. The transformation, previously gradual, accelerated catastrophically as the artifact exerted direct control. "Alert. Unauthorized evacuation detected," the Snotling announced in a voice no longer its own. "Initiating containment protocols." The transformed Snotling attacked with unnatural strength, metal claws extending from its fingers as it lunged at Nibbitz. The Grot leader barely dodged, his own enhanced reflexes saving him from disembowelment. Two other dissidents weren't so fortunate, falling to the berserk creature before the others could bring it down with concentrated fire from their salvaged weapons. "It knows we're trying to leave," Nibbitz shouted, his resolve hardening. "Run now. Freedom means nothing if we not ourselves." His words rallied the survivors, who fought with renewed determination. The escape party scattered, their carefully planned extraction degenerating into a chaotic flight. Alarm signals pulsed through the settlement's network, drawing attention to the betrayal even as the battle with Wrenchgob's forces reached a critical stage. Gribnibble received the alert with cold calculation. "Descent was inevitable in transition period," he stated flatly. "Those who cannot adapt will be recycled." He dispatched a squad of his most heavily converted followers to intercept the fleeing dissidents, their orders simple and brutal: capture if possible, terminate if necessary. Meanwhile, the battle at the main perimeter had reached a stalemate. Wrenchgob's forces had breached the outer defenses, but found themselves unable to penetrate further as more sophisticated weapons were brought to bear. The big mech himself had taken cover in a makeshift bunker, continuing to direct the assault while working on modifications to his own weapon based on observations of the defender's technology. "They're using some kind of phase field," he muttered to himself, making adjustments to his cannon. "If I reverse the polarity on these coils, might disrupt it long enough for the boys to get through. His analysis was surprisingly accurate. The artifact's power created a subtle phase-shifting field that enhanced the defensive systems beyond what their crude construction should allow. Disrupt that field, and the advantage would shift dramatically. The hidden kingdom blazed with unearthly light as Gribnibble channeled the artifact's power through the settlement's network. His exoskeleton, now more a component of his partially converted body than a separate machine, towered at the center of the command hub, blue energy coursing through conduits that connected him to every defensive system and converted follower under his control. Primary threat approaching optimal engagement range, he announced, his voice a harmonic resonance that bore little resemblance to his original Snotling vocalizations, initiating convergence protocol. Throughout the settlement, converted Snotlings and grots moved with mechanical precision toward predetermined positions. Their bodies showed varying degrees of transformation, some still appearing mostly organic with only subtle metallic sheens beneath their skin. Others so thoroughly converted that they resembled small, crude approximations of Necron constructs. Their forms twisted amalgamations of salvaged metal and living tissue, reconfigured at the molecular level. Wrenchgob's forces had penetrated the outer perimeter, but now found themselves caught in a carefully prepared killing zone. Energy weapons fired from multiple angles, while converted defenders engaged in close combat with a coordination no grot or Snotling should possess. The Orks fought with their characteristic ferocity, but even their robust physiology had limits when faced with weapons that disrupted matter at the atomic level. "This ain't right," growled one of the boys, as he watched a wounded comrade's arm dissolve under a direct hit from a blue energy beam. "These ain't normal grots." Wrenchgob himself had taken cover behind the wreckage of a battle wagon, his mechanical arm extending periodically to fire his modified cannon. The big mech's analytical mind, unusual for an orc, but typical of the mechboy subspecies, was racing, cataloging observations and formulating hypotheses about the technology he faced. "Some kind of control system," he muttered, making further adjustments to his weapon. "All them little ones moving together, like they got one brain between them. And that blue energy reminds me of something I seen in an old Yumi ship we looted, something the Yumis was real scared of." His modified cannon now incorporated elements salvaged from the battle, including fragments of the defender's own weapons. In typical Orky fashion, he had created something that shouldn't work by any rational standard, but somehow did. A disruptor that could temporarily neutralize the blue energy fields by emitting a counter-frequency. "Let's see how you like this, you glowy gits," he shouted, emerging from cover long enough to fire a concentrated burst at a cluster of energy conduits. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The conduits exploded in a cascade of blue sparks, and the coordinated movements of the defenders in that sector faltered momentarily as their connection to the central network was disrupted. Ork boys seized the opportunity, charging through the gap with choppers raised and crude pistols firing wildly. In the command hub, Gribnibble registered the disruption as a momentary flicker in his awareness. The artifact pulsed with something akin to surprise, an emotion it shouldn't have been capable of, yet somehow expressed through its connection to Gribnibble's still partially organic brain. "Mechboy Wrenchgob has exceeded analysis parameters," Gribnibble observed. "Threat assessment upgraded. Direct intervention required." The decision made, Gribnibble disconnected from the central network, additional components folding into his exoskeleton as he prepared for combat. The artifact now occupied the entire chest section of his form, its light pulsing with increasing intensity as it channeled power directly into offensive systems that had never been tested in actual combat. Meanwhile, across the settlement, Nibbitz and his band of dissidents fought a desperate battle against their former comrades. The storage area where they had taken refuge was under assault by converted followers, their movements jerky but relentless as they attempted to breach the hastily erected barricades. "Hold the line," Nibbitz shouted, firing a salvaged energy weapon that sputtered and sparked with each shot. "We just need to last until the humans' friends arrive." Outside the settlement, Magos Krell led his extraction team through the chaos of battle, using the Orks' assault as cover for their approach. The Skitarii Rangers moved with inhuman precision, their augmented bodies and tactical systems allowing them to predict and avoid the worst of the fighting. "The artifact's energy signature is spiking," Krell reported, his own system struggling to resist the contamination that had begun spreading through his augmetics. "It appears to be preparing for some kind of major power expression. Recommend accelerating timetable," the Skitarii leader concurred, and the extraction team increased their pace, cutting through less defended sections of the perimeter with specialized weapons designed to disrupt the Necron-influenced technology. Their objective was clear: reach the central command hub, secure the artifact, and withdraw with all possible speed. Back at the main battle line, Wrenchgob found himself facing an unexpected development. The coordinated defense suddenly shifted, defenders pulling back in an apparent retreat. The big mech was too experienced to accept the opportunity without suspicion. "Hold position," he ordered his boys, who were eager to pursue. "Something ain't right. Day's making it too easy." His caution was justified. As the last defenders disappeared around a corner, a new figure emerged from the settlement's center. Gribnibble, in his fully powered exoskeleton, now a towering construct that combined Orky scrap, Imperial salvage, and distinctly alien geometries in a terrifying whole. The artifact blazed at its center, blue light streaming from every joint and seam. "That's different," Wrenchgob acknowledged, genuine appreciation in his voice despite the obvious danger. "Now that's a proper bit of mech work, that is." Gribnibble advanced methodically, energy weapons extending from multiple points on his exoskeleton. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made even the Orks' crude audio receptors vibrate uncomfortably. "Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own," he announced. "Resistance is inefficient. Submit and be improved." Wrenchgob responded in typical Orky fashion. With explosive violence, his modified cannon roared, firing a shell that incorporated his counter-frequency technology directly at Gribnibble's chest, where the artifact's glow was strongest. The impact was spectacular. Blue energy coruscated around Gribnibble's form as the artifact's field and Wrenchgob's disruptor fought for dominance. For a moment, the exoskeleton froze, its systems temporarily scrambled by the unexpected attack. Then, with a surge of power that left scorched metal in a circle around him, Gribnibble reasserted control. "Adaptive protocols engaged," he stated flatly. "Your technology has been analyzed and countermeasures implemented. Further resistance will result in termination rather than assimilation." Before Wrenchgob could respond, Gribnibble fired. Multiple blue energy beams converged on the big mech's position, vaporizing his cover and forcing him into a desperate dive that his bulky frame was ill-suited for. One beam caught his mechanical arm, dissolving it into component atoms with frightening efficiency. "All right then," Wrenchgob growled, pain and genuine excitement warring in his voice as he took cover behind a fallen Ork boy. "This is going to be a proper scrap." Across the settlement, Nibbitz's gambit had succeeded, partially. Half their number had fallen in a push through converted followers' lines, but Nibbitz and 7 others had made it to the eastern perimeter, where they encountered an unexpected sight: heavily augmented humans in red robes, moving with military precision toward the settlement's center. The human was telling truth, Nibbitz gasped, recognizing the Mechanicus forces from Krell's descriptions. They really came. One of the Skitarii Rangers turned toward the approaching grots and Snotlings, weapon systems automatically targeting before Krell's intervention. "Hold fire," the tech priest ordered. "These are the uncontaminated subjects I referenced. They can provide tactical intelligence on the artifact's defenses." Nibbitz approached cautiously, aware that these humans were as dangerous as they were potentially helpful. "You Krell's friends?" He said. "You come to stop the artifact." "That is our primary objective," the Skitarii leader confirmed, his voice mechanical through his Vox grill. "You will assist by providing optimal approach vectors to the central command hub." "We help," Nibbitz agreed, his simple words carrying the weight of a manifesto, "because freedom means keeping our own minds, not becoming something else's tools." The bargain struck. This unlikely alliance began formulating a new plan. The dissidents would guide the extraction team through maintenance tunnels that bypassed the main defenses, while the battle between Gribnibble and Wrenchgob's forces provided essential distraction. At the center of the conflict, that battle had escalated dramatically. Wrenchgob had rallied his surviving boys for a coordinated assault, using tactics no Ork should have been capable of. A testament to the mech boys' unique cognitive abilities, they attacked from multiple angles, forcing Gribnibble to divide his attention and energy reserves. For his part, Gribnibble fought with the cold precision of a machine, yet with strategic adaptability that revealed the artifact's true nature. Each Orky tactic was countered, each temporary advantage neutralized by rapid reconfiguration of defenses. It was a grinding, brutal conflict, with casualties mounting on both sides. What neither combatant realized was that the true decisive action was taking place elsewhere. Guided by Nibbitz, the extraction team had reached the outer chambers of the command hub through maintenance tunnels originally designed for Snotling workers. They encountered sporadic resistance from converted followers, but their specialized weapons made short work of these obstacles. The artifact's primary housing should be through these chambers, Krell indicated, his augmetic senses picking up the energy signature with increasing clarity. Caution is advised. Proximity will accelerate conversion processes in unprotected organic tissue. The extraction team had nearly reached the central chamber when the entire settlement shook with the force of a massive explosion. A sound like thunder rolled through the corridors, followed by the distinctive roar of an Ork war boss. Not Grimtooth, but something bigger, louder, and infinitely more destructive. "Wag, Zack Stomper is here. Boss Zack Stomper wants all the shiny bits." The conflict within the command hub erupted with devastating intensity. Gribnibble, even in his damaged state, remained a formidable opponent. The artifact pulsed with renewed energy as it recognized the Mechanicus forces, ancient combat protocols activating in response to a threat pattern hardwired into its very essence. "Mechanicus detected," Gribnibble intoned, his voice resonating with harmonics that made the chamber's metal components vibrate sympathetically. "Priority override. Preserve the primary awakening node. Satan resurrection protocol initiating." Blue energy lashed out from his damaged exoskeleton, striking one of the battle servitors and dissolving its augmetic components in a cascade of atomic disruption. The Skitarii Rangers responded with disciplined fire, their specialized weapons designed to disrupt Necron energy fields without triggering catastrophic reactions from the artifact itself. Containment protocols initiated, the Skitarii leader announced, his augmented voice carrying over the cacophony of battle. Converge on the artifact. All units maintain suppression pattern Epsilon. Margos Krell had positioned himself at the modified interface, his mechadendrites extending into the control systems as he attempted to establish a technological beachhead against the artifact's influence. The contamination that had begun to affect his own systems actually proved advantageous, providing insight into the artifact's operational parameters. The artifact is attempting to broadcast a distress signal, Krell reported, his voice strained as he combated both external and internal threats. Energy signature suggests activation of secondary protocols. Recommend accelerated extraction timeline. Nibbitz and his surviving dissidents use the chaos to provide covering fire for the Mechanicus forces, their knowledge of the settlement systems allowing them to disable key defensive nodes. The Grot leader had found his calling in this moment of crisis, not as a revolutionary seeking power, but as a defender of his people's right to remain themselves. Outside, a new and greater threat had emerged. Warboss Zagstomper's arrival had transformed the battlefield entirely. Unlike Grimtov, whose relatively modest warband controlled this region of Gorkamorka, Zagstomper led a true Warg. Thousands of Orks drawn by rumors of strange technology and the promise of proper fighting. Their vehicles smashed through the settlement's outer defenses as if they were made of paper, Ork boys pouring through the breaches in a green tide of muscle and crude weaponry. "The metal Snotling King," Zagstomper bellowed as his personal battle wagon crashed through a barricade. "Where is this runty git who thinks he can be a boss? Zagstomper wants his head for a trophy." The massive warboss stood twice the height of a normal orc, his frame augmented with crude bionics and armor salvaged from a Space Marine dreadnought. His weapon of choice, a massive power maul that crackled with unstable energy, had reportedly been torn from the hands of an Imperial Knight pilot before Zagstomper crushed him with his bare hands. Stories of the warboss's ferocity had spread across 3 sectors, drawing more and more orcs to his Wah with each world that fell before him. "I heard about this place," the warboss continued, addressing his mob as they rampaged through the settlement. "A snotling who thinks he's a boss, a challenge to orky ways, that cannot stand." Renshkop, who had managed to survive his encounter with Gribnibble by retreating when the tide turned against him, found himself caught between 3 forces. Gribnibble's converted followers, the newly arrived Mechanicus team, and now Zagstomper's overwhelming Wag. The big mech made a tactical decision that would have been unusual for a normal orc, but aligned perfectly with his methodical nature. He withdrew further, using the chaos to observe and gather intelligence on these various threats and opportunities. Inside the command hub, the battle between Gribnibble and the extraction team reached a critical point. Despite being outnumbered, the partially converted Snotling fought with terrible efficiency, his exoskeleton's weapon systems keeping the Skitarii at bay, while the artifact continuously adapted to their containment technologies. 2 more rangers had fallen, their augmetic bodies dissolving under the touch of energy that disrupted matter at its fundamental level. "Containment is failing," the Skitarii leader reported, as another specialized field generator overloaded. "The artifact is displaying adaptive capabilities beyond predicted parameters." Krell, still connected to the interface, made a desperate gambit. Using the contamination spreading through his own systems as a conduit, he attempted to establish a direct link with the artifact itself, not to control it, which would be impossible, but to distract it long enough for the remaining Skitarii to deploy their most powerful weapon, a null field generator designed to temporarily suppress all energy emissions within its radius. The gambit worked, but at terrible cost. As Krell established the link, the artifact surged into his systems, accelerating the conversion process that had already begun. His augmetics began to transform, metal components flowing like liquid as they reconfigured according to Necron architectural patterns. His consciousness fragmented, caught between his own identity and the ancient alien will that now invaded his mind. Now, he managed to transmit to the Skitarii leader, his Vox unit distorting as it physically transformed. Deploy while it's distracted. The Skitarii reacted instantly, the null field generator activating with a subsonic pulse that made every metallic surface in the chamber vibrate. For a brief, critical moment, all energy fields collapsed, including those maintaining Gribnibble's exoskeleton and the artifact's defensive measures. The Snotling leader staggered, systems failing as the artifact's glow dimmed to almost nothing. In that moment of vulnerability, Nibbitz made a decision that would define the rest of his life. While the Skitarii moved to secure the temporarily dormant artifact, he approached Gribnibble's fallen form. What he saw beneath the damaged exoskeleton was barely recognizable as the clever Snotling who had once dreamed of freedom from Ork oppression. Gribnibble's body had been almost entirely converted, organic tissue replaced by metallic components that mimicked living forms while serving the artifact's purpose. Yet in the fading glow of the artifact's light, Nibbitz saw something in Gribnibble's eyes, a flicker of recognition, of the original personality struggling against the overwhelming alien presence that had consumed it. For just a moment, the old Gribnibble looked out at him, confused and afraid. "What happening to me?" Gribnibble whispered, his voice briefly his own again. "Can't think anymore." "You being consumed," Nibbitz replied, kneeling beside his former leader. "The artifact taking you over, making you something else." "Help me." Gribnibble's voice faded as the artifact began to recover from the null field's effects, its glow strengthening as systems reactivated. The moment of lucidity was ending. Nibbitz had seconds to act before the artifact reasserted full control. With grim determination, he raised his salvaged energy weapon and aimed it at the exposed artifact in Gribnibble's chest cavity. "Sorry, old friend," he whispered, "but freedom means making hard choices." Before he could fire, the chamber's wall exploded inward, admitting the massive form of war boss Zagstomper. The Ork leader had fought his way through the settlement with singular purpose, drawn by stories of the metal Snotling king, who dared to challenge the natural order of greenskin society. "Is this it?" Zagstomper bellowed, taking in the scene with unexpected shrewdness. "This little thing is the big threat? Looks like the Humies already broke it." The Skitarii immediately redirected their weapons toward this new threat, but they were too few and too damaged from the previous fight to present a serious challenge to a war boss in his prime. Zagstomper laughed, the sound like rockreed being crushed, as he advanced into the chamber. "Shiniest bits go to the biggest boss," he declared, reaching for the artifact that lay exposed in Gribnibble's damaged chest cavity. "And that's Zagstomper." The artifact, sensing a new potential host, one far more physically powerful than a mere Snotling, pulsed with renewed energy. Tendrils of blue light reached out toward the war boss, seeking to establish the same kind of control it had exercised over Gribnibble and his followers. What it hadn't accounted for was the unique nature of Ork physiology and psychology. the Orks' natural resistance to psychic influence, a product of their own latent gestalt, Warg, energy, created an unexpected barrier to the artifact's attempts at direct control. More importantly, Zagstomper's absolute conviction in his own dominance, the unshakable belief that he was the biggest and the best, hardwired into every Ork warboss's brain, actively rejected the artifact's attempt to subsume his consciousness. "Something tickling my brain," Zagstomper roared, more annoyed than concerned by the artifact's attempted intrusion. "Zagstomper don't like that." With typical Orky problem-solving, the warboss raised his power maul and brought it down with earth-shattering force directly on Gribnibble's prone form. The impact was catastrophic, smashing through the exoskeleton and sending fragments of metal and machinery flying in all directions. The artifact itself was knocked free, skittering across the chamber floor, trailing blue energy like a comet. "Much better," Zagstomper declared, seemingly unaffected by his brief contact with the ancient Necron technology. "Now, who else wants a crumpin?" In the confusion, Krell, his body now a grotesque hybrid of Mechanicus Augmetics and Necron technology, dragged himself toward the dislodged artifact. Despite the transformation overtaking his systems, enough of his original programming remained to recognize the importance of containing this threat. With his last functioning mechadendrite, he activated the stasis field generator he had been saving as a final resort. The device activated with a soft chime, projecting a field that isolated the artifact in a bubble of frozen time. Inside this field, the artifact's energy was neither destroyed nor contained, but simply paused, a temporary solution, but the best available under the circumstances. Stasis, field, established. Krell transmitted to the surviving Skitarii. Estimate 72 hours before field collapse. As if to punctuate his statement, another wall of the chamber exploded inward as more of Zagstomper's Orks poured into the command hub, weapons firing indiscriminately at everything that moved. The battle for the artifact was about to enter its chaotic final phase. The command hub had become a maelstrom of destruction. Zagstomper's Orks unleashing indiscriminate firepower, the remaining Skitarii firing with precision at the artifact's exposed core, and the settlement systems failing in cascading explosions as the network collapsed. At the center of this storm lay Gribnibble, or what remained of him, the exoskeleton in ruins torn apart by the combined assault, revealing the horror within. The Snotling's body had been almost completely converted, organic tissue replaced by metallic structures that mimicked living forms while serving the artifact's purpose. Where his chest should have been was a cavity that had housed the artifact itself, a crystalline shard that now lay within Krell's failing stasis field, pulsing with diminishing green light as it sought escape. Nibbitz stood beside his former friend's remains, the disruptor still clutched in his hands. "Not big, not strong, but still me," he muttered, a personal mantra that had sustained him through the horror. "Still got my own thoughts, something you never understood." The surviving Skitarii converged on the artifact, weapons still trained on its pulsing form. Their programming allowed them to accept what would likely be a suicide mission without hesitation. They moved in perfect coordination, targeting weak points in defenses, sacrificing themselves to create openings for their comrades. Zagstomper, displaying the frustrated rage typical of an Ork thwarted of proper violence, had resorted to physically smashing everything within reach. "Why won't it break?" he roared, bringing his power maul down on a bank of controls, sending sparks flying. Shiny things supposed to break when Zagstomper hits them. the artifact seemed to be waiting, conserving energy while seeking an opportunity. Its light pulsed in an almost hypnotic rhythm, subtle tendrils extending just far enough to test potential vectors before retreating. It was learning, adapting, calculating odds with cold precision, even as its network failed around it. Nibbitz knew he would have only one chance. The disruptor needed direct contact with the artifact to work properly. No small feat, given the energy field still surrounding it and the crossfire that made any approach perilous. He needed a distraction, something to focus the artifact's attention elsewhere while he made his move. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Wrenchgob, who had followed Zagstomper's force into the settlement, appeared at a side entrance to the command hub. The big mech had repaired his mechanical arm with typical Orky improvisation and carried some kind of cobbled-together device that hummed with unstable energy. "Oi, Zagstomper," he shouted over the din of battle. "You's doing it wrong. That shiny bit needs special handling." The war boss turned, momentarily distracted by this challenge to his authority. "Who's this git?" he demanded of his nobs. "Some weedy mech who thinks he knows better than the boss." "I's Wrenchgob," the big mech declared, advancing into the chamber with surprising confidence. For an orc facing a much larger and more powerful opponent. "And I's been fighting this thing while you were still crumping grots on some backwater rock. It's got special powers, technology stuff. You can't just smash it." "Everything can be smashed if you smash it hard enough," Zagstomper countered, but there was a note of uncertainty in his bellowing voice. The artifact's resilience had clearly unnerved him. "This thing absorbs energy," Wrenchgob explained, showing unexpected insight. "The more you shoot it, the stronger it gets. But I've worked out how to disrupt its patterns." He held up his device, which appeared to be a modified version of the counter-frequency technology he had used earlier against Gribnibble. "This will shut it down long enough for proper looting." The artifact reacted immediately to this new threat, recognizing the potential danger of Wrenchgob's technology. Energy tendrils surged toward the big mech with unprecedented speed, forcing him to activate his device prematurely. The resulting energy pulse disrupted the artifact's field, but also created a feedback loop that caused Wrenchgob's device to explode violently, sending the big mech flying across the chamber. In that crucial moment of disruption, Nibbitz made his move. Darting from cover, he sprinted directly toward the exposed artifact, the disruptor clutched in both hands. Orc fire passed overhead. Skitari weapons created a perimeter around his approach, and the artifact, momentarily weakened by Wrenchgob's intervention, could not muster an effective defense as he reached the fallen remains of his former friend. Nibbitz hesitated for just an instant. Despite everything, this had once been his friend, a fellow Snotling who had dreamed of something better than endless servitude. In the artifact's pulsing light, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition in what remained of Gribnibble's eyes, a last fragment of the original personality, trapped within the mechanized horror he had become. "I'm sorry," Nibbitz whispered, then pressed the disruptor directly against the exposed crystal shard. Time seemed to slow as the device activated. The sanctified technology, designed specifically to counter Necron energy patterns, created a containment field that collapsed inward, forcing the artifact's essence back into its crystalline housing. The shard's light flared blindingly bright, then began to dim as its energy was systematically drained and grounded. The effect rippled outward through what remained of the network. Throughout the settlement, converted followers collapsed as the controlling influence was severed, their partially mechanized bodies returning to a more natural state where possible, shutting down entirely where the conversion had progressed got too far. Energy conduits overloaded and went dark. Defense systems failed, and the pulse of alien technology that had defined the Hidden Kingdom faded to nothing. In the command hub, the artifact gave one final, desperate surge of energy, a last attempt to preserve itself by transferring its essence elsewhere. The disruptor's field contained most of this outburst, but a small fragment, a mere splinter of the original shard, escaped the collapsing containment. It arced through the air like living lightning, seeking a suitable host. By cruel chance or calculated targeting, this splinter struck Zagstomper directly in the center of his forehead. The war boss roared in pain and surprise, clawing at his face as the metallic fragment burrowed into his flesh. For a moment, it seemed the massive orc would succumb, his body convulsing as the splinter attempted to establish control. Then, remarkably, Zagstomper laughed, a booming sound that shook dust from the ceiling. "Ah, tickles," he declared, apparently more amused than harmed by what should have been a catastrophic infiltration. The unique nature of orc physiology and the powerful psychic field, generated by their collective Wahag energy, had somehow neutralized the splinter's influence, reducing it to little more than an unusual implant that would eventually be incorporated into the war boss's already extensive collection of battle scars. As the artifact's light faded completely, silence fell over the command hub. The Skitarii emerged from cover, weapons still trained on the now dormant shard. Zagstomper's orcs looked to their boss for direction, uncertain whether to continue fighting now that the primary target had been neutralized. "The container is secured," the Skitarii leader announced. "Primary objective accomplished. Commencing extraction procedures." Two of the remaining Skitarii moved to secure the shard, producing a specialized containment unit designed for transport of dangerous archaeotech. As they worked, Zagstomper stomped forward, his massive form towering over both the Mechanicus forces and Nibbitz. "So, it's over?" the war boss demanded, sounding almost disappointed. "No more shiny bits to smash?" "The immediate threat has been neutralized," the Skitarii leader confirmed, calculating the odds of successfully extracting the artifact without further conflict with the Orks. "This technology is now under Mechanicus jurisdiction by order of the Omnissiah." Zagstomper's brow furrowed, a dangerous sign in an orc of his size and temperament. "Sounds like Humie talk for we's taking all the good loot," he growled. "Zagstomper didn't come all this way for nothing." A tense standoff seemed inevitable, with neither side willing to concede the artifact. It was Wrenchgob who provided an unexpected solution. The big mech had survived the explosion of his device and now limped forward, his mechanical mind already analyzing the situation for maximum advantage. "Boss," he addressed Zagstomper with the perfect mix of deference and confidence, "the shiny bit ain't worth the trouble. It's all burnt out now, just a dead rock. But all this other technology," he gestured around at the remaining infrastructure of the Hidden Kingdom, "that's proper loot, stuff we can use to make bigger guns, our faster trucks, all sorts of killy things." Zagstomper considered this, his small eyes narrowing in thought. "Bigger guns is good," he acknowledged. "Faster trucks means more fighting." "Exactly, boss," Wrenchgob continued, warming to his theme. "Let the skinny humies have their rock. We've got a whole settlement of better gubbins to loot, and I figured out how some of this tech works already. Can make improvements to your personal gear, make you even more killy than before."